is the creepiest music, the scariest song I have ever heard associated with anything on any kind of horror movie or show or whatever. And that has a lot to do with the guest we have on today and the subject about which we will speak. And we have with us John Kenneth Muir. He is the author of many books about horror and cinema and such, which is just a hoot. And he'll be on our show the last Friday along with Adam Go Rightly. But what we're going to talk about today is the book that he's written called An Analytical Guide to Television's One Step Beyond, 1959 to 1961. Again, it's One Step Beyond. And man, did it burn an indelible mark into my brain. And John, thanks for coming on.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Keith.
Oh man, I'll tell you what. I don't know what it is that got me on this trail a while ago. It's probably having a bout of insomnia and just going down whatever roads I'm led. But I guess I had mentioned something when I had started using part of that theme song, which is entitled Fear, for an intro, and then someone said, hey, One Step Beyond still floating out there, and then I started looking, and I came to your site, and folks, I'm going to tell you right now, and the link is up there, along with the link to the audio, and John's website as well, which is johnkennethmuir.com. All that's on my homepage. But there's a transcript of an interview that John did with John Newland, who was your, was he your host into the Beyond or something like that?
That's it exactly. Yeah. Your guide to the world of the unknown.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about One Step Beyond. We're going to talk about John Newland. But I tell you what, John, why don't you set up a little brief historical synopsis of the show?
Absolutely. One Step Beyond, which was originally called Alcoa Presents, because back in the day of the late 50s, early 60s, we had companies sponsoring a whole hour or half hour of entertainment on television, as opposed to today where we have various companies doing it. So One Step Beyond was originally called Alcoa Presents One Step Beyond, but it was a paranormal anthology that premiered in 1959, actually 10 months before Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone. And John Newland, who was a star of sort of golden age television, was not only the host of the series, but he actually directed all 96 segments of the show. And he was very aware of what TV was like at the time, and he had guest starred in a lot of shows, and he wanted to do for his show, One Step Beyond, something very different. Instead of focusing on sort of supernatural horror like later shows like Night Gallery, for instance.
That was a Serling production also, was it not?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Rod Serling's Night Gallery, you got it. Instead of just doing that, what he wanted to do was investigate the paranormal. And so all of his stories, he wanted to have some foot in reality. And so when he narrated, he would say things like, what you're about to see is a matter of human record. Explain it, we cannot. Disprove it, we cannot. And it was that sort of thing where he actually tried to investigate all of these paranormal events. And so in the course of the 3 years and 96 half-hour episodes that One Step Beyond was on television, they did things like they did cases involving reincarnation, Bigfoot sightings. They even did a biography of Peter Herkos, a famous psychic at the time. They did, crisis apparitions and premonitions and clairvoyance and automatic writing. And basically what made the show so special was not just this amazing and moody black and white photography, but the sense that the people who made the show tried very, very hard to follow what the literature of paranormal studies were at that time. In other words, if there was going to be an apparition, they wanted to portray the apparition on the show as accurately as they could, according to eyewitness testimony and parapsychological lore. So the show was not only scary, it was in a sense really based on fact. And one of the interesting things about it, Keith, and I know you know this because you remember these episodes, but they would often tell a story on One Step Beyond, and then in the last 5 minutes of the half hour, they would bring on an eyewitness, the person who had experienced that story. For instance, there was an episode called Tidal Wave in 1960 about a deaf woman who was not able to hear the call to evacuate when a tidal wave was coming in, but she was rescued by a stranger who who sort of heard her calls for help. At the end of the show, they brought on the people involved. So, it tried very hard to be accurate and realistic, and, that just made it doubly creepy. So that's what One Step Beyond was. 3 years, 96 shows. Some were shot in Great Britain. I could list the amazing actors who were in the show. You've got William Shatner in an episode. Christopher Lee is in an episode. Warren Beatty is in an episode. Cloris Leachman. Great cast, great stories.
No, I'm just thinking back now because, as we've said before, in those days of TV, there seemed to be a number of actors who were the usual suspects that turned up in almost every show, regardless of what network. Because then, of course, ABC, CBS, and NBC were still 800-pound gorillas,
right,
and carried a lot of, I guess, story serials. And I won't go into the whole thing, but I remember like ABC, had just a whole bunch of stuff done by Warner Brothers that was Cheyenne and Sugarfoot, Maverick, and all this other stuff. And I mean, some of these actors would just be in all these shows, and the same is true with One Step Beyond. In fact, John Newland himself, as you had said at the beginning, and we're spelling that Newland, John is John. John Newland also appeared in other shows on TV, but the one thing that never fit when he played this kind of part, because of what he did on One Step Beyond, he was a cowboy. John Newland pulling the gun and saying, okay, and trying to be a heavy, it just isn't working,
Right.
That was so out of context. But you, I think was on your blog, I'm not sure. But somebody said it just perfectly about the way that Newland presented himself as the host. He said he was like a funeral director who just found out that there was, numerous fatalities on the interstate and they're bringing the bodies in.
I wish I had said that. I don't know if I did, but that's a great quote.
Oh, isn't it? I mean, because he just had the slightest little upturn to his mouth and his eyes, just a bit, where it was like...
Exactly. You weren't sure. Is he having you on? Is he not having you on? You weren't sure. He took such delight in the macabre elements of the series, and today it's very easy and very right how we credit Rod Serling with so much of the creative genius of the Twilight Zone. But I think the same courtesy is really due John Newland.
Yes.
Consider he directed every single segment, almost 100 of One Step Beyond, as well as hosted them. So that look that we're all familiar with, it comes on at 2 a.m. and it hits you in the face, this aura of black and white creepiness. That's what John Newland did. So it's really an amazing accomplishment, I think.
And they did it well, and they did it understated. I mean, in the last 20 years, we've had to become inured, if we're willing to do that, with slasher movies and a lot of gore and a lot of body parts. But back then, it was also a lot like what Hitchcock did, where the turning of a doorknob, like a close-up, would drive you right out of your chair, not knowing who was going to come in on the other side. But you remember that set, too, because he did two things. One, he would do his standard intro, if I remember, and he had this very plain, and of course it was black and white, so it was this like gray background. But you know what was spooky about it? The shadows that were cast through that transom with like the three spokes.
Yep.
I mean, I think they call them transoms, whatever that decorative thing is over the front door. That's glass.
That's what it is.
Yeah. And those rays came in. I mean, the shadows came in, and it was like, that just spooked me out, and then he would also walk into the opening scene's stage setting.
Right. He exactly. He would come in and he would interact almost. He'd be there staring at the people, like they'd finish their scene and he'd be standing there, or walk amongst the sets and pick up a prop or what have you. So he was very integrated into the scenes. And what was so amazing about what he did is that some of those episodes are about such basic things. There's one like about a girl who has a premonition that a chandelier is going to fall, and sort of the whole episode, the whole 30 minutes is this buildup of suspense through her whole life as she goes through all these events in her life, and is the chandelier in the living room going to fall or not? And when is it going to fall, and what is it going to do? I mean, that's just such beautiful, economical storytelling to hinge everything on one device, to hinge everything on one idea, the idea of a chandelier, of a premonition that the chandelier in your house is going to fall. And he would do spinning cameras around the chandelier, low angles up. But, it's just brilliant stuff. And, of course, it was on a budget. It didn't cost anything to make that scary episode, you know?
Well, you make a good point, because what they did was, they used solid storytelling techniques, especially visually.
Right.
And it was only a half an hour show as far as I remembered that. Did he not do one or two that might have been expanded?
I think he only did half-hour shows for One Step Beyond. Now, he did go on later to direct episodes of Night Gallery and such, which were of various lengths, so you may be thinking of one of those.
Okay, no, I didn't know if he ever did like a special, because, you know, it seemed like, we'll talk about that one that he actually went down into South America for. I thought that might have been a longer, but for the most part, he did, okay, if he did exclusively half-hour shows.
Right.
What's good about that in those days is that there was less commercial content, and you got more, story content. Not like it is now. So you got a little bit more of a break trying to tell a story in a half hour, but still, that is very tough to do.
It is, and that's when you realize so much depends on performance and the image that's told, and how well written the story is. It's just, really, One Step Beyond has been my model for sort of effective, really low budget filmmaking, if you think about it.
Yeah, well, I'll say they did even a better job, but I think they were to TV horror shows, if you will, what maybe Night of the Living Dead was a low-budget, horror films. It wasn't a big expenditure, but they made it work. In black and white also, let's face it, when it gets down to things that are creepy, black and white still works as a medium, I think, much better than color.
I agree. When you're looking at something in black and white, Keith, and I think you feel the same way as I do, you're not looking at the color of the clothes somebody's wearing or the color of the wall behind them. You're looking at their faces, and you're looking at shadow, and you're looking at light. And it makes the actors almost come out more in black and white because you're really focused on their features and what they're saying. Not all of these things, not all these other things like I mentioned,
Well, what you just said I think is true, and this is why also I think it works still to this day in photography, and that is it's the gradations of gray, the shadows. Those are they're so much more dramatic than color can ever be. I mean, again, back in the old days of TV, which I remember, most of it being black and white, you also had shows, there's a million stories in a Naked City. There you go. The Naked City, I mean, it was about streets in New York and stuff, and you had to do it in black and white. Nobody wanted to see color. I mean, they were doing the gritty, dirty stuff, with puddled streets, and it always seemed like they shot in the winter because it was a snowbank on every corner. But that's and The Defenders is another one I remember from those days with E.G. Marshall and Robert Reed, his first TV series, and it was done in the city, and it was it was black and white, and it worked. It had to be like that. It drew all the attention of viewers to the actors and to what they were doing and to the cuts. And there wasn't all this, they never shot like any kind of vista or skyline of New York City because that wasn't part of it,
Right.
It was down and dirty stuff. And so this was in One Step Beyond. Let me just set this up for you real quick if I can. Do you remember, I believe that One Step Beyond jumped day and time once. Do you have any other schedule changes for them for any of the three seasons?
Gosh, I don't think so. I think it pretty much kept the same time. The only real format shift was that it shot like the last 13 in Great Britain because they kind of needed a change, and I think there was just one schedule shift. I think that was in the third year, I think.
All right, I thought it changed the day because, all right, now I'm watching this show now. Do we remember when new shows were birthed in the old days? Was this coming out in September of '59?
It actually started in January '59.
Whoa.
It actually, it started like the mid-season, it's the beginning of 1959, but it's what today we would call a mid-season show. The 58-59 season. See, and that's how it beat Twilight Zone, because Twilight Zone came around come September '59, but One Step Beyond had already, had already been on the air for, almost a year at that point.
Okay, all right. Now, here's what happened. This is what I remember. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to look in the New York Times TV listings when I go back up to the university here, and go back into 1959 or 60, and look at the, because, all the shows obviously are listed there. But what I do remember is, and this was a big discussion point with my parents, whether they were going to let me watch One Step Beyond, because they didn't want to admit it, but it creeped them out too.
Well, it is
remember I would get, I would do my homework, but boy, I used that over my head. Let me tell you. Well, you better do your homework. Well, that homework got done on, I think it was Wednesday night. I'm not sure. Do you know what day it was?
I think it's been almost 10 years since I wrote the book. I don't remember what night it was on.
That's okay.
I'm embarrassed, but I don't remember which night it was actually on in its original broadcast.
I'm thinking it was a Wednesday night because it was a school night. I remember that, and it was at some time when I was allowed to watch it. So I had to get my homework done, and I had to get showered. I mean, they got everything they wanted out of me. And I remember the show before it was called Stagecoach. That I remember. I mean, I can't even tell you one plot line in Stagecoach because I was just sitting there, just waiting for One Step Beyond the Come On. And when it started with the music, and when it started with the drums, and with the One Step Beyond, bang, 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 when that came on the screen, I was like already gripping the arms of the chair,
That's great. Well, the thing is, I like to always say that, One Step Beyond, it looks like it was transmitted. It does look like it was transmitted from the Twilight Zone. You can watch it now. It just takes you back to a place and time. It's just really amazing, I think.
Wait, you wrote that book 10 years ago?
I realized when I was looking in the book because I wanted to recall the exact time. I was one of the last people who was fortunate enough to interview John Newland.
That's right.
And I wanted to look up and see exactly what the date was so I could tell you. And it looks like I interviewed him on the afternoon of October 28th, 1999. So it's not quite 10 years, but it's like maybe 9 years. The book came out in 2001 just because the world of publishing is so much slower than it takes a couple years to prepare and everything. But yeah, I was thinking that when I was so excited to talk about the show, I was I'm going to get to go back and revisit something, and I realized just how long it had been since I had actually watched all those episodes and written the book. So yeah, it was 1999 when I did it.
Boy, yeah, I can't. But and John Newland, I was happy to find out because this doesn't often work this way. His on-screen persona seemed very classy. He managed not to get himself involved in any tabloid stuff even back then because there still was the National Enquirer was with us back then as well.
Right.
He just seemed to be clean and sharp and did his job, and you found him to be the gentleman I was hoping he would be.
He was. I have to tell you, he was just a delight to interview. He spent probably 2.5, maybe even close to 3 hours with me on the phone, and he answered every single question I asked, and he didn't pull any punches. Like when I would ask him, what was your least favorite show? Or, they did a sequel series in the 70s in syndication called Next Step Beyond, which, wasn't very good. He was very upfront and honest about what the flaws of that series were. He was just very willing to talk about the whole experience from One Step Beyond to Next Step Beyond. He was a straight shooter. He was an open-minded guy, and, he's truly one of the great, I think, television pioneers. And sometimes I find out when I'm interviewing people in Hollywood today that, people who I really respect and like on screen or who are my heroes, I get to interview them and I end up not thinking much of them personally, and it kind of makes me sad. But, that was not the case with John Newland. He lived up to my expectations and far, far beyond that. He was an amazing individual, and the only thing I would want to add to that is that he did, unfortunately, he passed away in January of 2000. He was 82 years old. So, I spoke to him in October 99, and he was gone by January 10th of 2000. So.
But, was he still sharp as a tack or whatever when you were talking to him?
Absolutely, he was. He would remember titles of episodes and things. I said, what was your least favorite episode of One Step Beyond and why? And he remembered it was called Blood Flower. It's a not very good episode about a flower carrying the blood of revolutionaries in South America or something. He said, I just thought that concept stunk. He was just a great guy, and he remembered episode titles. He remembered his interactions with actresses like Suzanne Plachette or actors like Warren Beatty. He just remembered everything. He remembered specific shoots. He was able to tell me a story about meeting Frank Sinatra on the set of One Step Beyond, shooting an episode called If You See Sally. It was just amazing. It was really one of the highlights of my professional career to be able to share that time with him, and he was just very giving, I think, to do that.
And he was in a very pivotal spot. Not only had he been an actor and now was the host for the show, but he was also a director, and so he knew what he was talking about. And I guess, it might have been a really interesting relationship for him to be involved with this wave of new actors and actresses that would soon be the bombs, if you will, in the 60s through the 70s.
Oh, absolutely. He told me fascinating stories about what it was like shooting Warren Beatty and how insecure Warren Beatty was. He was in an episode called The Visitors, and how he would come and watch the dailies every day to make sure that he was doing okay, to see all the raw footage of their episode and stuff. Just, really amazing stuff to learn about. He told that story about Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was shooting a war movie on the side of one hill.
And then doing it.
Yeah, and Newland was filming If You See Sally on the other side, and Frank Sinatra sent a messenger over to him and said, keep it down, John, we're trying to film a movie here. And John Newland, this is unbelievable to me, John Newland said, he sent a message back to Frank Sinatra saying, tell Frank he can go F himself, because we're shooting a TV series here. And so John Newland went back to shooting, not thinking anything of it, and he said there was dead silence on his set. And he turned around, and Frank Sinatra was standing behind him, standing right behind him, and he said, I got your message, John. And he said Frank Sinatra was wonderful, and they hugged, and everything was fine. But I mean, God, could you imagine? Oh, man.
You don't say that to somebody from Hoboken, New Jersey.
Absolutely not. I mean, that takes balls of brass to say that to Frank Sinatra, I think.
And then, so why don't we just say it all now? I'm speaking with John Kenneth Muir. He's a Jersey boy, so he understands where that's at. Well, you grew up in Essex County, didn't you?
I did, absolutely.
Right, that's a county you didn't go to. I mean, there was no reason for me to go to Essex County.
It's a really pretty county in New Jersey. It really is.
Well, my friends were in Harrison, so... Anyway, but be that as it may, we're talking about a TV horror show, and horror almost seems to be a little bit too drastic a word. Would you call it suspense? I mean, how did when you wrote the book, how did you term that genre of a TV show?
It was very hard to do, and I wrote the book sort of in the heyday of shows like The X-Files and Millennium and such. So I was very much comparing how One Step Beyond treated these concepts and how newer shows did. So I did sort of lump it in with the horror, but I agree with you that it's really an imprecise comparison. There is really no comparison. I mean, it's suspense, thrills. It is horror in a sense. There was one episode called Ordeal on Locust Street about this horrible thing upstairs. It was like a fish boy and stuff. So occasionally it would go straight into horror, but it wasn't like what you would think of horror necessarily today, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and honestly, I would call it horror too. But to me, it was just so much classier than what we call horror today.
Right. Because today, you think a lot about the special effects. Today there are a lot of remakes and things like that. One Step Beyond was really sort of an original initiative. There had never been a show like it on television before, and that's another thing that John Newland told me. He said, I was on the set, midway through the first season of One Step Beyond shooting, and he was called on the telephone by Rod Serling, and Rod Serling asked to meet him in person. And John Newland said, well, sure, I'd be glad to meet you. They went to a restaurant together in L.A., and Rod Serling told him, he said, I just want you to know I'm not going to rip you off. He said, I'm doing a show called The Twilight Zone. He said, but it's not paranormal, and it's not about, evidence of the paranormal or, documenting the paranormal. It's just an anthology of fantasy, science fiction, and horror. And that really meant a lot to John Newland because, like I said, One Step Beyond was one of the few shows like that on TV at that time. And he said to me, that just proves what a class act Rod Serling was. Is that he took me aside personally, we met, and he said, I'm not going to rip you off, John. Instead of just letting The Twilight Zone premiere 10 months later, and, boom, there it was, and people would draw the comparison. So,
yep. Well, I mean, you're right. He wasn't expected to do that, but he did that, and that exudes class.
It's absolutely, and that's what John Newland said. He's just a classy guy, and everything I've read about Rod Serling certainly indicates that was really the case. But that was one of my favorite anecdotes too, because today Twilight Zone is so popular. It's been remade so many times. It's everyone knows what the Twilight Zone is, but besides a couple of diehards like us, right? People don't always remember how good One Step Beyond was, which makes me sad.
And you had said to me, and I appreciate that you said that, and it makes sense. one step beyond, because it isn't remembered by too many folks, because obviously you got to be a fossil like myself to have, been involved with it. I mean, obviously my folks who watch it are no longer with us, so all that's left are those of us who were born, anywhere from what? I don't know, mid-40s, I guess you would call them the boomer generation. And I don't know how many of them, contact you. And I look at the blog and the people who do in fact post there. It does seem like some of them are older, because they say they remember watching it. Some have seen it on whatever DVD collections they get it on, or perhaps even some independent stations that might be running it in the wee small hours of the morning.
Well, and that's how I discovered One Step Beyond. I discovered it in syndication in the 70s, and it sort of, rocked me back on my psychic heels. Whoa, what is this? Because I ended up seeing it. I was a young insomniac. By the time I was in middle school, this show would appear at 2 a.m. and I'd say, what is this? This is amazing. It was so scary and seemed to just exude so much creepiness and menace, and it seemed to be literally transported out of some sort of nether world before my eyes, and that's how I discovered it. But it very quickly moved out of syndication, I think, by the 80s, and now, as you said, there are 96 episodes, but I think only 50 to 60 are actually available on DVD, and they're all One Step Beyond has fallen into the public domain. So these are all sorts of, they're not remastered things. These are old prints, that have been found at, local stations around the country. So, we don't have a really good, One Step Beyond collection, no definitive One Step Beyond collection, which is, I think, unfortunate.
Well, this is also bad news in a sense, because had it not fallen out of public domain, the good news is some company would have gone ahead and restored them and really done a great job. It would have cost something, but you still would have had almost all of them preserved. That just didn't happen, did it?
No, it didn't. It didn't. If you look at some of the DVD collection, you can see where, the film ends abruptly in a scene. And I actually got to ask John Newland a little bit about that, because I was even watching old prints when on video, when I saw it, when I was reviewing them all for the book. And I said, this scene seemed abrupt. Was that because the film was damaged? Was that how you shot it? And he said, oh, no, he said, no, we did it right. But I guess the prints have just become damaged and frayed, and, some pieces are missing. It's unfortunate.
All right, now I want to be fair about this. A couple things, folks. John's coming back. He's going to be on the 27th for the 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time show that Adam Gorightly is going to co-host as well. We're calling it the Untamed Grassy Knoll, a little hybrid of both our shows, The Untamed Dimensions, and also Beyond the Grassy Knoll. So he'll be in on this. John's coming back to be with us for 2 hours. So if you get a chance, folks, after listening to this, you get a heads up. Take a look at all he has to offer, because we're going to get into all the other books he's written. And I would think, John, would I be correct in saying this, that we would welcome anecdotes from folks across whatever generational lines as to their favorite producers and shows, like Wes Craven and the Fred Panera stuff and all that.
Absolutely. No, I love to talk the horror genre, TV or film, with anyone who loves it. So I'm looking forward to it.
All right, and that's going to happen Friday. And again, the website is johnkennethmuir.com. His books are all up there. John, I didn't follow through, but somebody is handling your publishing. Is that true?
Yes, yeah. McFarland is my publisher.
Right? Okay.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, they're the ones who released the One Step Beyond book. That's right.
All right, and you're okay, because Amazon and some of the other online booksellers, it gets a little strange with some of the authors. But in this situation, I mean, you're fine with that. And going to McFarland is just right with you. Is that correct?
They can go to McFarland, or they can go to Amazon.com. That's fine too. All my books are at Amazon or Barnes and Noble. And any web bookstore carries my books, or they can go to the McFarland website. That's right.
All right. And again, folks, if you get a chance in between when you hear this on Monday. And between those 4 days or so, until John comes back on Friday, please by all means take a look around. There might be some that might hit your fancy for sure, and also come on with whatever you might have to recount about your days with getting scared when getting scared was kind of fun. Anything else you want to add, by the way, about the website, so that I'm not remiss in telling folks the resources that are there?
No, I think you got it all. You can, if you go to my website at www.johnkennethmuir.com, you can see pictures of all my books. There are links to my blog, and there's also a link to my internet TV series, which is black and white, Keith.
There you go.
It's called The House Between.
All right.
So you can see the whole scope of my work from my website, from blogs to my internet show to pictures and excerpts of my books.
And if you don't mind, in this second half hour, would it be okay if we go into some of the shows that I ranked as my Letterman top 10?
I would love that, yeah.
And, you being nice to me by saying my memory is so good, but at this stage of my life, I can probably remember what I did when I was 2, but I can't tell you what I ate last night. But seriously, and you and I said this off mic too, and that is, this is an indication about when you're young, and I'm thinking, obviously I was 8, 9, and 10. I mean, that's the extent of it. I was no older than 10 when this show left the airwaves. And I remember it. I mean, it's seared into my brain. There's no two ways about it. I won't say that it was a nasty and ugly, any kind of traumatization, but it has to be understood. When you're young and your brain is an open book or whatever, some of these experiences that you have that do definitely radically shake you up, you remember. And, I'm looking at 40 years later, plus, and these were just off the top of my head.
Well, I think that, things like that, I always say that they carry psychic weight, or they loom large on your brain. Your brain at that point is very impressionable, and this is often the first time you experience something of that nature. And so the weight of it is just amazing, and you always remember it. I know I certainly feel like that about influences in my life, and it's funny sometimes. The good thing about One Step Beyond is it's really a good show, and it stands the test of time. I remember when I was a kid going to see a drive-in movie called Legend of Boggy Creek, and it's a horrible movie. But it scared me when I was a kid. But it's a horrible movie.
Well, let me ask you this: Did you drive to the drive-in?
Yes, I was driven to the drive-in with my folks. So.
Oh no, because I was going to say if you drove and you probably had a girl with you, you didn't give a damn what was on the screen.
I was too young for that, I think. That's the experience I missed, unfortunately.
I can't remember too many drive-in movies I saw, but anyway. All right, the ones that I remember, and I think some of them are in the forefront because they seemed, they definitely had documented support. Mm-hmm. And one of them, and that's one of the interviews that we talked about that gave credence to the show, the one I had listed first, and I'm not sure I'm going into the best to the least, I just did them. And that was a show that was about people having precognition about the sinking in World War II of the HMS Hood.
Yeah.
And what Newland did, and I had asked you about this, they interviewed somebody who was supposed to be on that ship, and that turned out to be an actor who also made the rounds in those days, whom you told me was Robin Hughes. Is that correct?
That's correct, absolutely. So it was a British actor who was working in the 60s who actually had the experience that the episode was about, which is amazing. The episode was from the third season of One Step Beyond. It aired on April 4th, 1961. It was called Signal Received. And it's just like you said, it was about precognition about the sinking of the Hood. And it followed 3 sailors in particular. And each one sort of had this experience, about their deaths and the Hood. And one was spirit board divination, one was clairaudio, and another I think was just straight old clairvoyance. But 2 were negative and 1 was positive. 2 people knew they were going to die, and one guy said that he was the spirit board guy, said he'd live a nice long life or something. And sure enough, the episode ends with these 3 guys walking onto the Hood, and the one guy gets pulled off. He got a transfer order, and he lived a long and happy life, And then 1,500 people, including those other 2 sailors, died when the Bismarck sunk the Hood. In 1941, and it's just what you said, is that John Newland brought this actor on whose experience this was to talk about the show. Again, I was shocked at your recall that you picked that one off immediately and that you remembered all the details of it.
And Hughes was that person who got picked off, wasn't he?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Now there is something related to that you and I both went back around. Excuse me again, choking on water. And I got this a little mixed up, but then you cleared it up for him, because I remember this one too. I think most people may have encountered this story other places, but this is, and I'm going to throw this to you, this is the show they did on the Titan.
Yes. Now, Keith, this is my all-time favorite episode of One Step Beyond, and it still drives me crazy. And what it is, it's about sort of the psychic web of happenings that surrounded the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. And one of the things it talked about was a Canadian minister who changed the hymn that night at his church for no reason to pray for those in peril on the sea. And there are things like that. In fact, there was a professor at University of Virginia who had collected like 19 reports of the paranormal, all associated with the Titanic, and I don't know, maybe a handful of those were like precognition about people who were going to board the ship and were afraid of drowning or things like that. But that's what the episode is about, the sinking of the Titanic and this web of all these psychic phenomena around the sinking. But what absolutely floors me, and it gets me every time, is that John Newland, at the end of the episode, walks to a bookcase, and he pulls out a book, and it's called Futility, written by a man named Morgan Robertson. It's a novel. It's a fictional story, supposedly. The novel's plot is about the first voyage of the largest ocean liner ever built. On an April night, this fictitious ship strikes an iceberg, and because there aren't enough lifeboats on the ship, over 1,000 passengers die in freezing waters. Okay, the name of that ship in the novel was the Titan. The book itself was published in 1898, 14 years before the Titanic sinking. And, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, if you'll forgive me.
That was a rotten pun.
I'm so sorry, that was terrible. But let me just tell you, some of the other similarities.
Sure.
In Robertson's novel of 1898, the Titan was 70,000 tons. That's how much the ship weighed. The Titanic was 66,000 tons. The Titan was 800 feet long. The Titanic, 880 feet long. Both ships had a top sailing speed of 25 knots. And the most bizarre thing is that both ships struck icebergs and sunk on a night in April. I mean, to me, that just gets me every time. And I did all this research on this. I thought, he is making that up. I thought, there's no way that's true. And I followed a couple false leads, but then I found it is true. And the book was actually republished, I think, maybe in 1997, when Titanic sort of nostalgia, I hate to use that word, was popular again because of the James Cameron film.
Right.
But I mean, this is actual truth. Somebody wrote a book that forecast, with all those details, the sinking of the Titanic, and it was just called Titan. I mean, it really boggles the mind.
That's a tough one to argue with. How did you know?
Right. I mean, one or two things like that, I'd say coincidence, but you placed it in the same month, with the same problem with lifeboats, with the details of the ship being so similar. I mean, it certainly raises questions.
Do you know anything about the author's name was Robertson?
Yeah, Morgan Robertson was his name.
Do you know anything about him?
I don't know much about him. I went back and I followed some false leads because there was some book I found in the 80s that had the wrong title for the book and had the wrong author. So I thought, okay, that's one thing against it. And then I went back to a Collier story from the late 1800s that was supposedly this story, and it was not. It was one called The Liner and the Iceberg, but it was about like an old trawler ship, I think named the Amelia or something else. So like none of the details were right. So I was thinking, okay, this book didn't really exist. John Newland put me on. But then I found all the details, and they were exactly as he said. But I don't know the biography of this author.
Okay. So. You have no idea if he comes from the UK, do you?
He does come from the UK, yeah.
All right, we won't get into that, but we will talk some other time.
Okay.
All right. Secondly, I had written to you again on one that was based on fact, it seems, and a story not necessarily unknown to a lot of folks, and that is Lincoln's dream of being assassinated and viewing his own funeral in the White House.
Right. Now, this was a One Step Beyond episode from 1960 in the second season. It's called The Day the World Wept. The Day the World Wept, the Lincoln Story. And very much like the Titanic episode, it involved sort of all the psychic phenomena around the Lincoln assassination. For example, a printer in East Pennsylvania hammers out a headline in the episode like hours before the assassination that reads, "Lincoln murdered, national tragedy." But it does focus on the very issue you remember, which is that Lincoln had recurring visions of his own death while he was in the White House. He described these dreams to members of his cabinet, so there is eyewitness testimony that he had those dreams. And one dream involved him awaking in the White House to sounds of weeping.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked a guard, what's going on? They said, the president has been killed. And that was just one. He had another dream early in his term where he saw two images of himself in the mirror.
Yep.
In one, his face was completely normal. In the second, it had this sort of death-like pallor across it, like he was looking at himself as a corpse. And his wife, Mary, who really believed in his dreams, said to him, she said, what this dream represents is that you're going to be alive and healthy through your first term, and you're going to be killed in your second term, or you're going to die in your second term. I think that's probably more precise. I don't think she said you're going to be killed. I think she said you're going to die in your second term. So it is documented fact that Lincoln did very much fear for his own death and had dreams of his death while he was in office. And that's another one of the great One Step Beyond stories, I would say.
No, it was well done, and this is just a quick plug for folks who want to realize just what Lincoln knew with regard to the enemies that surrounded him. There are two good books out there. One is called The Lincoln Conspiracy by, I think, Baldinger. And there's another one called Dark Union by, I think it is, Neff and Gutteridge. They will show you just exactly what he knew he was up against. His precognition may have been based a lot on what he rightly should have feared.
Right.
But that's, my little conspiracy political plug, and that's what the show's about, so I'll move.
Well, have you ever heard of the theory of retrosynchronicity?
Well, we might have called it a bunch of other things on the Grassy Knoll, but go ahead, throw that out.
Well, I came across this when I was researching the book, and I just wanted to name it because, of course, people can say it's coincidence like people always do, but the theory of retrosynchronicity is that Lincoln and Kennedy are basically connected, and that their paths follow the same course.
Right.
Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1847, Kennedy in 1947. Each man was killed by a bullet to the head in the presence of their spouse. Both were warned not to go on the trips that killed them, either to the theater or to Dallas. And their assassins, Wilkes Booth was born in 1839, Lee Harvey Oswald in 1939. And then the name of Kennedy's secretary, of course, was
Lincoln.
Lincoln. I don't know if there's anything to that, but something about that just fascinates me. I can't help it.
Yeah, there is. There's even more to it, I would say, but also 63 was a pivotal year for both.
Right.
I both definitely believe that Lincoln and Kennedy each knew the way things really, what really runs the world, and there are handlers, and I think both of those presidents said, I can't do this, and that was fatal for Lincoln. Obviously, it probably happened in and around visiting Gettysburg. With Kennedy, it happened beforehand, but of course in 63 he was assassinated. Lincoln was assassinated in 65, but both of those presidents were pretty much lightning rods at very critical times in our history. And and also, I'm only going to throw this out to you. I'll deal with this in a later show, but just to tweak you a little bit, John.
No.
In the how should I say? In the classic Assassinators handbook, if you want to kill a head of state, the best way to do it, in that protocol is a headshot.
Oh, okay.
And if you take a look, you'll find that there's, look at Robert, RFK headshot, and I hate to say it, although Teddy's not assassinated, he's dealing with a cerebral problem.
Right.
Anyway.
Well, maybe there's no connection. I just had to bring up that retrosynchronicity.
Oh no, without a doubt. No, and we don't believe in coincidences on Beyond the Grassy Knoll. One of the other things I had asked you about, but then also I thought this is probably the one that gave me the heebie-jeebies the most. The first two were just real, it just was real convicting. But this one spooked me out, and they did it very well. And that was, now here's how I wrote it to you, and I think you have that in your book, and that is the ghost of a giant. This took place in Mexico, who, kills like what I thought was an abusive soldier, like, whooping up on the peasants. How close did I get with that?
Well, again, you have amazing recall because that's exactly what it is. The story you're talking about is called Persons Unknown, and it aired in One Step Beyond's third season, February 7th, 1961. So you probably know where you were, February 7th, 1961. It takes place in what is essentially sort of a haunted convent of sorts, one that was constructed over the site of an Aztec shrine. And there's the myth that it reportedly houses the spirit of a deceased warrior, this giant that you mentioned, who was sacrificed by his king. But in the course of the story that we're watching on One Step Beyond, this giant appears and kills a sadistic soldier. It's exactly what you said. It's an abusive soldier. And an eyewitness to this is a man named Dr. Adel, A-T-L, who saw the ghost and reported basically a plaster mold of the dead man's face.
Yes, that's
revealed
right.
Giant handprints on it, like he'd been, smothered. And then, the topper, of course, is that the story ends with the actual Dr. Adel, joining John Newland on this dark stage for an interview about this occurrence. And, he's not able to explain it, but he said, he saw the ghost. It was right there with him. It's an amazing story. And, as far as accuracy, what I dug up is that there is an ex-convent in, I don't know if I'm saying it right, La Merced, Mexico City. And there is a real Dr. Adel, who was a renowned art critic and artist. And he did live in that convent. Now, I was not able to track down anybody who could send me to a mold of a
death mask
face
with
the fingerprint.
Mm-hmm.
So that may have been embellishment. But it's amazing to me that you remember this one because, whenever I write books about shows, I think of sort of signature episodes. Like, the Twilight Zone you always remember, or the Star Trek you always remember. It's like there's like maybe a handful in every show, like 10, one, like you say it and it lights up a room, everyone remembers it. And, I wouldn't say this is like a signature One Step Beyond show, but you remembered it down to the last detail, which is pretty amazing to me.
Well, now, have you seen that particular show at all?
Yeah, I got to watch it for the book. And it's funny, I consider like the Lincoln or the Titanic ones, like, those pop out at me, but it's like, out of 96, I didn't remember the details of this one until you brought it up. And it really is a fascinating story.
Well, they did it so spookily, too. I can't even recount it, but the fact that it was desolate, there's something invisible going on. Now, the only thing I'll ask you, because, I do have a historical edge to me, did that have to, do we know that took place in the early 20th century, or did it take was that supposedly before? The reason I'm saying is because you had Maximilian's troops, the French troops that were in there, who were definitely not liked by the Mexican people.
It was definitely in the 20th century.
All right, so that was...
it was when Dr. Adel was a younger man, so it would have probably been the early 20th century.
All right, that would have been around Juarez, I would believe. Or Villa. No, Pancho Villa, that would have been.
Well, it's interesting because people, I don't know if I've said this before in the interview, but I get a lot of email about One Step Beyond with people asking me to help them corroborate their stories. And there are people who are interested in this episode who have tried very hard to get corroboration for this episode, there are other people who are trying to track this down, like, as we speak.
All right, that's good. But if it were in the 20th century, then it was probably around Villa's time. Villa's time. It was not. It had nothing to do with the French invaders. Okay, no problem.
Again, I'm not 100% sure of that. I'm pretty sure it's the 20th century, just because of what the man's age was at that time.
And you're right, because the guy was on the tube in 1959 to 60. Yeah.
So it would have had to have been an older man.
Mm-hmm.
So, it could have been back, 40 years or so, but he still would have had to have been, I think, 20th century.
No, you're right. Because in those times, too, there were so many overthrows of governments because they all seemed to get despotic on the Mexican people. And for that gentleman still to be alive in the late 50s going into the 60s, it was definitely around the time of Villa and whatever dictator put in whatever kind of, government. So that answers that you're right. All right, now we get another one, and there's something kind of serendipitous about this. From if I got it right, I remember rocks falling from the sky in what I believe was Chico, California.
That's right. Yep, that is an event from an episode called Where Are They?, which aired December 13, 1960, and it told two stories. In the first one, in this town of Chico, California, a rock started falling from the sky, and a man who called himself the Ghost took credit for it in March 1922. And then, but the crazy thing was the rocks fell at the same time every day. At 3 o'clock every day, rocks fell from the sky, all right? I mean, it's nuts. But then the ghost and the rock storms, everything just disappeared. And in terms of authenticity, this was one of my favorite things to research. History records that from July to November of 1921, rocks indeed fell from the sky in Chico, California for no explicable reason. A lawman named J.A. Peck investigated the case, and the San Francisco Examiner reported on the situation in March of 1922. There was a scientist, his name was C.K. Studley, who reported his findings, and let me just quote those findings if I can. Some of the rocks are so large that they could not have been thrown by any ordinary means. One of the rocks weighs 16 ounces. They are not of meteoric origin, as seems to have been hinted, because 2 of them show signs of cementation, either natural or artificial, and no meteoric factor was ever connected to a cement factory. And, what One Step Beyond was talking about here, beyond this case was the idea of some sort of anomalous phenomenon, and there was another instance of rocks falling from the sky in Charleston, South Carolina, on September 4th, 1886. So again, what's great about One Step Beyond, whether you believe in the psychic or not, is that it accurately took what the reports were on that story from Chico and portrayed them really pretty accurately, which I think is very admirable for a genre show to take such pains to depict the story accurately.
Agreed. Yeah, no, agreed. But again, that's why we're talking about this, because I'm one of the only people left. I even have to talk to some of my pards back up in Jersey, whether they remember this kind of stuff, because I don't even know if we talked about this then, because I don't know, we were into other things and Psycho was out and all this other stuff. But I got to go back and ask about that. Also, I'm going to say this, and I'm tweaking you, but I'm going to throw this up because it's provocative. Folks, take a look and see what latitude Chico, California is on, and I'll tell you why when we get back together again, John, on that Friday.
Okay, that's something I have absolutely no idea about. So I have no idea what that's about.
Well, breathe deep the gathering gloom.
Okay.
All right, now we go into one again, and this isn't far-fetched from what we're hearing about today, with all these alternative situations and cars running on water, on hydrogen, on McDonald's grease, and all this stuff. Do you remember the one where somebody went into a patent office and had some kind of pill or whatever that turned water into gasoline?
Absolutely. Now, that was the second part, actually, of this episode, Where Are They? The same one that featured Chico. It was told 2 stories in that half hour.
Holy mackerel, that's scary.
Yeah, and I mean, it's amazing. And it was set in 1917, and it features the disappearance of this genius who, just as you said, developed a chemical catalyst to turn water into fuel. And like, he goes before Congress, and it's all going to happen. It's going to be this revolution, and then he and his formula disappear suddenly, just like they were removed from the timeline or something. I have asked and I have researched this. I have never found the event that this is about. And again, I have to mention, people email me. Someone emailed me just, I think, last month about this particular case. And if anybody knows the specifics, I'd love to know it, because One Step Beyond didn't usually totally go off on a crazy tangent. Usually there was some, as we've proven, some authentic story behind it. My problem, honestly, Keith, and was that I sort of came along with this book a little too late. I was able to talk to John Newland literally months before he passed away,
right.
2 months, maybe 2 or 3 months. But a lot of the writers of the show were already dead when I was interviewing. I was not able to get a whole bunch of One Step Beyond interviews in the book because many of the writers and the producers were already gone, some 45 years hence from the series or such. So I don't have a trail to follow on this.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
I'd be curious to know, what was the basis for this. I mean, have you heard anything about this?
Myself? No. What I did is, though, I told you that somebody had just emailed me.
Sorry, did I lose you there?
No, are you there?
I'm sorry, I think I lost you there. Hold on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there we go. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, with regard to the Chico, California situation, ironically, somebody just emailed me from Chico, California about something else, and I've just asked the gentleman whether or not he's ever heard anything in lore or whatever that this took place if, in fact, it happened in Chico. So I was hoping he might respond to me. He obviously does not know that you and I were going to be speaking about this.
Right.
But we still have till next Friday to do this, a week from today. Well, we're recording this on June 20th, folks, so a week from today we're going to do a 2-hour live thing. Who knows what will come in, but that Chico situation... I'm sorry. We were talking about the gasoline thing. But
right.
But what's freaking me out, and you just said it, was that this was a 2-part show. They were juxtaposed within 2 weeks of each other.
Right. Oh, they were on the air the same week. It was like within the same half hour.
Holy mackerel.
Yeah, they were sort of vignettes, you know?
Can you imagine, though, that those two would do it, and I didn't even recognize it was a Part A and Part B?
Oh, you really? Because when you
no.
listened, I thought, yeah, I see that. You have them on separate lines. I thought, oh, that's one episode.
Brother, I'm telling you, straight as a heart attack, I had no idea that they were a Part 1 and Part 2. Holy mackerel.
That also, I'd say, is one of the signature shows that has raised the most questions. People are fascinated by the Chico thing because there's so much documentation you can find on it. I mean, there's stories in the San Francisco Examiner. There's a place to go, and I'm sure there's a place to go for the second story, but I don't know what it is. Like I said, I don't have a trail to follow.
Well, that bit about turning water into gasoline, real quickly. One, we had somebody down here in Florida who could run a car on water, and he wound up dead under, the Main Street News wouldn't call suspicious circumstances, but, And also, I had done a show with somebody out of Canada who was working on alternative gasoline substances, and this was before we got hit with this last, oil price hike. And I got in touch with him because I was tracking down somebody by the name of Caggiano who had come up with a 100-mile per gallon carburetor. And he has disappeared from the face of the earth. So this gentleman who went in, I guess, in 1917, you said?
Yep.
And went to a patent office. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
And he had this, but wasn't it the way the show left it was that he split before they came out and wanted to talk to him?
Well, it was just like he disappeared. Like I said, it was like he just disappeared off the face of the planet. Like he never existed at all. Which made me, now again, remember I watched these, 9, 8 years ago or so. Mm-hmm. But my feeling at the time, I know this is going to sound ridiculous, was that like he was like a time traveler or something.
No, it doesn't sound ridiculous.
But I mean that was sort of the impression I was left from the story, that he was somebody who maybe shouldn't have been there and shouldn't have been doing that, and so he was taken away. I mean,
right.
That was my impression at the time, and I may be misreading what my memory was from that time. But I remember stories like that fascinate me, where they offer no explanation. Then you start. Your wheels start spinning, and you start thinking, well, what could have been the explanation? So.
All right, and then, like I said, this is not unusual, though. If he had been a straight-up shooter, you don't mess with the oil oligarchs. They don't like that.
No, that's a fact.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, now, the one that also was extremely eerie, but you know what? In certain other venues, it is documented as having happened, and that was during World War I, a cessation of fighting, as those all throughout continental Europe claimed that they saw some light in the sky, and I'll just leave it there. How close am I with that one, John?
Well, you remember that one as well, and you must have been watching this show soon after it premiered. You must have caught on quickly, because that was only the 10th episode of One Step Beyond.
Really?
It's called The Vision. It aired March 24th, 1959, and it told this story that occurred at 2230 hours on November 14th, 1959, when French and German soldiers witnessed this glowing light in the sky. And after seeing it, no one on the battlefield was willing to fight anymore. This light had basically arrested all hostility, and there was a talk about this heavenly ray of light. And Newland explains in the episode that this light affected like 1,000 men from the English Channel to Italy to Russia, and that they could no longer fight that day. Again, here he gives you a trail. You're able to go back to that date and time, and I was not able to find anything on that date and time, which baffled me. But like you said, and this was my point when I wrote the book, One Step Beyond tried to portray things accurately. It didn't always stick to the letter of what happened in the story, because you have to get a story done in a half hour, you have to have interesting characters, you have to have dramatic license. So it will explore a concept accurately, even if it doesn't always report an incident accurately. And that's what I think what was happening here, because there have been many times throughout the history of warfare, particularly in the 20th century, when people have told stories like this. One possible explanation is what a psychologist called an emotional chain reaction, which is often described by psychologists and witnessed in the Vietnam War, where human beings basically send out emotional signals to other human beings that they pick up on. And what the event that happened in Vietnam that was recorded was that soldiers were fighting, and into the midst of the battlefield walked several monks. It wasn't a heavenly light, it was just monks. And in seeing the monks, one man stopped fighting, another man stopped fighting, an emotional chain reaction, and then more and more men stopped fighting until nobody was fighting. So I wonder if the idea of the vision is the same kind of story, the story of an emotional chain reaction, that perhaps it was just, that it wasn't that the light was from heaven, but that light triggered an emotional chain reaction, a psychic chain reaction, if you will, in the men fighting. And if somebody, I would love to hear if anybody has any information on that specific incident, because again, he gave us a trail there, but I followed it, and I didn't find any comment on that day at that time. So
we're going to run a little bit over an hour. Are you okay with that?
I'm totally okay with that if you are.
No, it's okay, because, again, like I said, I want to be generous with your time, but, this is such good stuff, and, perhaps I'm bad in time management, but...
listen, I'm loving it. I'm having a great time. So, yeah, let's keep going.
The other thing is, too, and I may post this again come Christmas time, but one of the things the thing about World War I is, comparatively, it was much more brutal and emotionally, I think, distressing to populations because they did not realize prior to this war how mechanized and how much more efficient killing technology had gotten. And so even though World War II was brutal also and much more widespread, still the whole shock to, I think, the collective human experience was extreme. And I'm just wondering if one believes in such, and I happen to, whether or not there was some kind of intervention back then that said, are you guys sure you want to go on this tack? And probably the answer was like, yeah, we got to. And so, okay, and withdrew. And here we go, with World War II and beyond. Just my guess, but I'll say this. I might put back up on my website, come Christmas time, the contents of a letter that was found from, I think, a British soldier fighting somewhere in France or Germany about the day they called the truce from Christmas through New Year's and went out and played soccer with the Germans.
Oh, wow.
And drank and ate with the Germans. And everybody's saying, boy, this really sucks. Why do we have to do this?
Oh, jeez.
Can you imagine that? It really is moving. And I think I'll post it again. I think Angie, who is affiliated someone with the show, who has a blog spot, also ran that. But it was just amazing when you think about the fact that, they could go out and do this, and then, okay, after New Year's, it's like, okay, back to killing.
Right. It's heartbreaking. It's very relevant to what's happening today, too.
Yep. Yeah. And, it's, anyway. But anyway, that was a very evocative and long-lasting show as far as its endurance in my memory. Then this one I don't remember a whole lot about, but boy, this one was really strange. All I remember at the end of the show were these streamers from like heaven, like toilet paper unrolled, that were dangling down to the earth. Can you help me out with this one? Because boy, that one's really vague.
Well, absolutely. Again, Keith, it's kind of funny because you picked, out of you sort of picked 10 that you remembered. And as I said, there were 96, so you picked, roughly 10%. And out of that, you picked the one episode that was about UFOs. They only did one show in their whole run about aliens and UFOs. And
okay.
That was the episode, and that's from the second season. It's the 51st episode, which aired April 12th, 1961, I think, entitled The Encounter. And like I said, it's the only show they ever devoted to UFOs, and it dramatizes, again, a documented case that occurred in the San Fernando Valley in 1953. And during that time, some kind of strange, they called it angel hair, fell from the sky, and dissolving in plain view of many eyewitnesses. And sort of like the rock fall in Chico, what we're talking about here is some sort of anomalous phenomenon. I would just add that other angel hair sightings did occur in Port Hope, Ontario on September 26, 1948. And I don't know if I can pronounce this, but it's a Japanese town called Iwaki, on October 4th, 1957. So it's interesting that there were 3 angel hair appearances between 48 and 57, and the One Step Beyond episode is describing the 1953 one in the San Fernando Valley. So yeah, I mean that angel hair was a silky gossamer substance that seemed to melt very quickly that many people reported seeing. So again, it was based on eyewitness testimony and events that were happening in more than one location.
Did it say anything? And again, this is I'm trying to rack my memory. Was it? I can remember a gentleman, a man, who was like on some kind of little ridge, and just like walking through this, like, what in the world is this? I thought he was a pilot. Is that true? Do you remember?
Yeah, because what the episode was about, Encounter, was about a pilot who was abducted, ostensibly by aliens. Yeah, and then returned. But you didn't see the aliens, and there wasn't any overt
reference to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Jeez. But I thought he had a flyboy, leather jacket with the fur.
He was a pilot. You're
collar.
Absolutely
Yeah.
right.
That's what I saw in my mind's eye.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what? I'm scaring me now.
I'm getting off the phone now.
I'm just kidding. And again, folks, we want to tell you what's going on here, but this is John Kenneth Muir. He, I don't know, he can typify himself. I would say that he's a historian about horror movies and horror TV shows and that whole genre. And one of the ones, the first one that drew me to him was what he wrote all those many years ago about the show One Step Beyond. Now, on his website, there are numerous books, which none of which are going to make anybody turn away, because it's the stuff that we loved. I mean, I'm sorry, but that was a dream and that was a time, and we just ate that stuff up. And again, John, anything you want to say about the website and the resources that are there?
Well, I always half-jokingly said to my parents, I want to make a living by writing about TV and film. And, that's what I ended up doing. But the things that fascinate me are these things, really, I mean, if I'm to be brutally honest, the things that happened between, 1960 and 1980 in particular. I love the, very odd and luminous and creepy entertainments that came out of the 60s and 70s, and so I'm very much devoted to that. But you can see I've done horror films of the 70s, horror films of the 80s, a book called Terror Television, which looks at all the horror shows from 1970 to 1999. But I'm just like you. I just love this material. It grabs the imagination.
Yeah, it does, and I am so tempted right now, and this is not the time to do it because we will have 2 hours in a few days to talk about a whole lot more. And Adam Golightly, a good guy from out on the coast, will chime in on this also, because he deals with something like this, but actually, unfortunately, the real terror that was brought by Manson cults and other things. But I mean, it's all out there. But right now we're talking to John about his book, An Analytical Guide to Television's One Step Beyond, 1959 to 1961. And boy, I tell you what, pound for pound, that show's still the best.
Yeah, I agree. I love it.
All right, we're getting down to the end of it, but here's one that, like the Ghost of the Giant in that Mexican scenario, that one got me a little bit. That was scary. Other ones, like I said, I was convicted by, and I'm like, wow, that's weird, and they documented it, so things do go bump in the night. This is another one that I thought was more distressing than anything else, and all I remember is that somebody was possessed by a portrait. It was covered up because of the problem, but when the person died, and the portrait was uncovered, that the portrait had somewhat aged, or almost like a Dorian Gray thing, with the person that was possessed by the painting. Can you set that straight?
Keith, I think this is the only place where I'm going to disappoint you. There were a couple episodes of One Step Beyond about portraits and such, and it sounds, I'm not 100% sure which one that was, but it sounds a little bit like this one called Image of Death, which aired in 1959, actually. Again, it was an early episode of the show, and it took place in France in 1892. It was about this woman who was sort of a common woman, and she killed a nobleman's wife. She poisoned her. And she became his wife. but she became increasingly paranoid about the fact that the place where her portrait had been hanging, there was this stain coming up through it, and that like she began to see that it was the shape of a skull or something like that, and like she just became increasingly deranged by what was there where the woman she had succeeded, where her portrait had been. It just came out, but this skull came down. Eventually, she drove herself crazy and died. Now, that doesn't sound exactly like the one you're saying, and I'm wondering if I missed the boat on that one. I'm not 100% sure. Okay.
All right. The deal with what you were just talking about, I do remember that. That she started to rub out the stain, and it started to take on the features of a face. And real quick, one of the things that reminded me of that show, although now that song is like so many years gone, I mean it's 30 years, and that was when 10cc did a song called I'm Not in Love. He says he hangs a picture up because it hides a nasty stain that's lying there. And of course, that's what happened, I think, in that show, wasn't it, that there was a photo over this spot that started to take on some kind of countenance. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It sounds like that song could have been written about image of death, because it was the portrait of the dead wife, and under it was coming up that skull. Yeah, so that sounds exactly like it. That's funny.
All right, well, who knows, but I mean, like I said, there are no coincidences on the Grassy Knoll. Anyway, next up, if we could, and that is another thing I remember, and that is some kind of phantom jockey that won a race.
Yeah, this was an episode from June of 1959 called Front Runner, and it was the story of a jockey's apparition. A man who was wronged, a jockey, comes back from the dead and basically denies another jockey his victory. And then they find out that jockey, the ghost, had died like a day earlier or something like that, so he really was dead when he won the race. Now, I found no evidence of that particular event, but I did run across a horse racing story, which I think is sort of indicative of how One Step Beyond does things, is that it takes a certain world like horse racing, and then we'll do a story like this, and the details of the story aren't always absolutely accurate, but the concepts are. And this story, I'm quoting, it's about the owner of a horse had a dream in which he saw his own horse winning the Melbourne Cup in 2 weeks. But there was something else in that dream. His jockey in the dream was wearing a black armband. So the owner told everybody he knew about the dream, and they all testified to the fact that he told them about this dream. It was well documented. Everyone knew about it. So flash forward to 2 weeks later. The owner's horse did win the Melbourne Cup, and the jockey did wear an armband. But do you want to know why?
Why?
This is crazy. He was mourning the owner's death, who had passed away in the intervening 2 weeks since he had the dream and told everyone about it. So the black armband the owner imagined was for his own death.
For his own.
Yeah.
It's not for whom the bell tolls.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is just so classic One Step Beyond. I mean, that's the stuff that, you don't want to think about in the middle of the night,
Yeah. Now, this one pretty much has been dismissed. And the ones that I picked out, I think also, it would seem from the pattern that I've created, have been those that seem to have some kind of basis in fact.
Yeah, those seem to have been ones that really resonated with you. I noticed that when I went through the 10 you selected out of the 96 were ones that seemed to be like the most true to life, real life, where they had witnesses, where they had documentation, and it's stunning to me that those are the ones you remember, because that must mean that even when you were a very young man, you were hooked into that kind of idea that that you wanted it to be real. You know what I mean?
Well, and also that indeed things do go bump in the night.
Right. And that here's the evidence. That even back then you were looking to see if it was real and looking for that evidence. So that probably says something about your psychology, Keith.
and we don't want to talk about that right now, do we? Well, and here's another one, and you did state before we got on that this was the weak link, and that is, and it did seem such that somebody who's playing some kind of game, I don't know what game this would be, who took on I guess the familiar spirit, if you would, of the object he was in the game. And think folks about playing board games and stuff. Sometimes you take on a personage or whatever. Was somebody who suddenly turned into what I call the big game cat, and you did nail this one, and you think this one is a little bit out there too, right?
Yeah, I do. It's funny. You remembered exactly right. It was a big game cat. I think it was a tiger. It was a story from January 19th, 1960. It was entitled Forest of the Night for that poet, a poem by William Blake, Tiger, Tiger, Burning
Bright, yep.
And it's about a hunter who plays a game, and it's a Chinese occult game called Confucius's Book of Changes. So that's the game they were playing. And one hunter's icon is that of a tiger. And I found a lot of really great literary references in the episode to Rudyard Kipling and William Blake. But I looked into the Book of Changes, which is considered a work of divination and has been often mistranslated. And Confucius did believe in the world of spirits, but I can't find anything that ties that to any event, any sort of paranormal event where somebody takes on, that appearance and becomes a tiger and sort of runs wild, which is what the theme of the episode was. So yeah, that was one that was sort of more overtly fictional, but it's also a very memorable episode.
Yeah, it was. Again. And the guy who was the lead character in that was kind of like a smallish, schlumpy guy you could smack around. And then you can think, well, this is, you could see, in the characters, thinking that here's his chance to be something feared.
Right.
But and that's another guy who appeared in more than one Step Beyond episode. I know he did, and he also made the rounds again in the 50s TV series.
Let me see if I can figure. I'm gonna dig through the index of my book here and see if I can find out who that guy was.
I bet you he has somewhat of an Irish surname, like Shaughnessy or something like that.
I'm going to page 120 here. Farce of the Night. Let me see. Let's see, we have Ted's icons out of a tiger, and Ted was Alfred Ryder, and he's playing a character named Ted Dolliver. Huh.
So that's a gentleman, Ryder?
Yeah, Alfred Ryder, R-Y-D-E-R.
All right, I bet if people put that in a search engine on IMDb, they'll come up with a whole bunch of stuff he did in the 50s, 60s TV.
Well, I was going to tell you, because I'm a crazy fan of this stuff, he was in a Star Trek episode called The Man Trap, and he was in an Invaders episode, but I can't remember the title of it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, you're right. He was in a lot, definitely.
All right, now this one, again, as I thought back to it, I gained a little more memory about it, and I even emailed you saying, well, append something, because this is what happened. It was a woman who was dead who saved her son.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is actually one of my favorite episodes of One Step Beyond 2. It's titled Epilogue, and it was only the 6th episode of the series. Again, you must have really started watching the show fairly early. This was February 24th, 1959, so 6 weeks in you were watching. Involved in this was a woman named Helen and her little boy Stevie, and together they became trapped in a mine during a cave-in. The mother, Helen, died in the rockfall, but her son, Stevie, was alive. So the crisis apparition of Helen appeared to her alcoholic husband, Carl Archer was his name, imploring him to save their son. But the problem is, this was the tension of the episode. Carl is an alcoholic, so his psychiatrist doesn't believe him. His psychiatrist was played by William Schaller, another one of those great faces of, 60s television and film. But yeah, it's the story of a crisis apparition, a manifestation of someone at or near the time of death, and in most cases, the person who sees the apparition isn't aware that the real person is dead. So again, this wasn't built on a specific incident, but it accurately portrayed what the literature was on the idea of a crisis apparition. It got every element of the story right, but it wasn't actually based on some specific happening. And we talked about this when we talked a little earlier, but the woman who was the crisis apparition Helen was played by Julie Adams, who was the starlet of Creature from the Black Lagoon. I think a movie we both love.
Oh, yeah, and again, she was a very good-looking woman, again in black and white. It looked like she had roan hair or whatever. But she appeared in so many things, like 77, Sunset Strip, and all this other stuff. And she was in that particular segment, and I can still see her, in just certain frames of that show. And like I said, that was a hard one for me to recall, because I had written something to you, and then I changed it, and I said, no, this is what it is. And I can still see her in her dress and all that stuff. And, man, I almost thought, too, let me say this. I thought she lifted a car off him, but it was actually she got him out from underneath rocks.
I think so. Now, again, remember, I haven't watched the episode.
That's all right.
That's what I gleaned from my notes. Although that sounds awfully familiar, too. There was another episode of One Step Beyond that might be called Emergency. No, wait, what was it? No, it was called 12 Hours to Live, about a guy husband who was in a car that went off a cliff, and like they had to get him out of the car. And that one might be the one you're thinking about with the car.
Again, and listen, I really appreciate your patience with hanging with me on this, and a lot of this, as folks should know, is being done, extemporaneously, because that's the way we wanted it. And I don't know what it says about my malformed brain, but it does definitely say something. But
these things are in there.
Yeah,
these episodes are in there.
And I have a conspiracy site, and and a lot of people say, well, it's not theory, folks. The thing is, there was something in my lifetime where I wanted to take a look and actually say, look, something's not right here. I've got a lot of things in my life that I've encountered, and it doesn't jive with what we've been told, and that's not the thrust of the show. But I mean, obviously, for a lot of people who've been listening to this show for these 6 years, are now saying, so this is where you got your roots, huh, Biz?
Well, it is fascinating if you think about it. I mean, really. I mean, because obviously what this did was there's a lot of validation and legitimacy in One Step Beyond for these things. It's not saying this is hokum. It's not saying this is crazy. What it's saying is that this is a science we don't yet understand. And look, prove it we cannot, disprove it we cannot. But here we're going to chronicle it, and we're going to chronicle it as accurately as we can with the knowledge we have today. And I mean, I think to me that's something that is just extremely fascinating, and I can see why that would be something that would trigger your mind into thinking that way. I mean, it was a very open-minded show. Oh, I'm sorry.
John has a family, and you just heard from one of the
that's right.
The defendants.
That's my 2-year-old boy, Joel.
All right. You have 2 children?
I just have one son. He's 2 years old. Well, he'll be 2 years old in October. He's one of the lights of my life.
Okay. Well, I just had a premonition. You're gonna have a girl next.
Oh my gosh, we want to have another child, and we really want a girl. So I hope that's.
Oof! Here we go.
All right. I'm going to be checking back in with you in about
6 to 8, 9 months.
Right.
One other thing, and this is really sketchy, and this is the last one I'll pop on you. And that was, there was some show where I remember Newland talking about bilocation, but I cannot remember the show. And that would involve with somebody who was in 2 places at the same time. What I do remember is his rap after the fact, which I felt very compelling. I do not remember the fodder of, the story itself. Did you come up with anything about the bilocation?
Yeah, One Step Beyond did a couple episodes that sort of orbited around the idea of bilocation. So I came across 2. One is called The Return of Mitchell Campion, and that's one you might more accurately think of as an out-of-body experience, which is technically bilocation because the body seems to be in 2 places at once. That's where somebody's undergoing surgery and also sort of has, goes off and has like a romantic affair on an island somewhere, but they're actually in surgery. The episode I think you might be talking about is Justice. A 3rd season episode in which a man falls asleep in church and is seen there by all the townspeople. But at the same time that he's asleep, he's actually across town committing a murder. And it's funny because the point of the story is actually more legal than parapsychological. In this case, it's like testing Western law. Like, okay, we know this guy, he's confessed to murder, we know he's committed murder, but everybody in town saw him in the church at the time the murder was committed. So it was like testing Western law. And there were actually a couple episodes of One Step Beyond that did that. And, again, I just have to go back and say I think that was very forward-thinking because, again, the idea of One Step Beyond is that we're chronicling this thing that we don't really have good science for, but someday we will have the science for, and someday we will be able to explain these things. And so what it was saying is that, what if this goes into a legal venue? What happens then? So it was really speculating, like what could happen, if somebody who bilocated, was accused of murder. Could you prove that in court? Which I think was a fascinating idea, and well ahead of its time. That was. I think you were probably thinking of Justice, but it might have been The Return of Mitchell Campion.
And real quick, and you have to speak to this because I know I didn't give you a heads up on that. But when we were talking about the Phantom Jockey, again, these things are just emerging, which I think is a pretty cool process, and I thank you for being involved in that. But there was one where there was a boxer also that got involved with fighting some ghosts. There was a ghost in the stands. I think it was during World War II Britain. Does that ring a bell at all?
Oh, good Lord, you are really good. You know what I'm going to tell you is that Charles Bronson was in that episode.
How to be a boxer, right?
I'm pretty sure. Let me just. I'm going to check my.
That's okay. It was a ghost of somebody, and he saw him in the. That's what's coming back. He saw him in the.
It's called The Last Round. January 10th, 1961, and this is what I wrote about it in the book. A slightly past his prime boxer living in England during World War II encounters the ghost of another boxer, a famous former middleweight champion named Paddy, who now appears only to fighters about to die in the ring. Although Paddy's appearance is thought to be a hoax, fate takes a strange twist when four people distinctly see Paddy sitting in the back row of the arena. Mm-hmm. You remember that one, too. Yeah, that's called The Last Round, and it was the ghost Paddy. I'm not sure who played him, but it looks like Charles Bronson was the guy who saw him, was the boxer who saw him. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that one, was plucked out of thin air because of what you spoke about with the Phantom Jockey. That one was just birthed by itself. And there's others out there. The only thing I will say to you is that in the late 80s, there were some One Step Beyond shows that were just being broadcasted by an independent station. Right. And there were some, and they kept rerunning them. But, I mean, that's the only goose I would have gotten with what I remembered from 59 to 61. And it's interesting from what you said, how many of those remembrances of mine were from 59, 60, and 61 as I got older also, you know what I mean?
Right.
And got more cerebrally, perhaps, developed, we hope. Not always the case, but... John, I've got to thank you so much for, just... dealing with me in this whole situation, but also because I was glad I found somebody who could harken back in time to a show I still think that, like I said, was pound for pound probably the best there ever was on TV.
Well, listen, I have totally enjoyed this. I mean, this has been like memory lane for me. I have to say that, it's been a delight talking with you, and also that it's just really nice to revisit One Step Beyond. I probably had more fun writing that book than any other book I did because it took me out of my daily routine. I wasn't just writing about camera angles. I wasn't, I got to do this other thing, which is that I decided when I started writing the book that if John Newland went to all the trouble to try to showcase these ideas, these paranormal ideas accurately, then I, as a writer, had to take the trouble to actually try to determine if he succeeded or not. So I got to research psychic phenomena for this book, which is, that's not what I usually do every day. I write, treaties on, Star Wars, and you know what I'm saying? It's like, so it was a fascinating thing for me to be able to talk about the paranormal and to research the paranormal, and even more of a thrill than for me to be able to go back today with you and talk about some of the things that I found.
All right, and folks, also remember, you'll be able to access the transcript of John Muir's conversation with John Newland, which is priceless. Also, and for you folks who listen to the show, who gets popped up in this but Buharic, and that's another whole interesting situation. So by all means, go to that site, take a look at that, and also all the books that he has out there, because, John, you'll be back on Friday the 27th, and we're going to unleash the hounds and talk about the whole 9 yards of wonderful, loony horror movies, horror shows, and local venues, the whole 9 yards. Is that correct?
That sounds great.
That's it. And there's no more of a fitting venue than it would be for a late Friday night.
That's great.
I can't wait. All right, listen, John, thanks a lot again. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot also to your family for holding wraps down on the young son, and you're going to have a daughter, and don't worry about it.
Thank you so much, Keith. This was a blast. Thank you so much.
Well, it ain't over yet, and we'll see you in a couple of days.
Sounds good.
All right, God bless you. Have a safe weekend, bro.
God bless you, too. That was great. Thank you, Keith.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.